Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Welcome on, Chris Taylor.
What is up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined again for the second night in a row by Matt Moreno. Matt, yesterday we were celebrating the end of the Major League Baseball lockout, the beginning of the season right around the corner. Tonight, I would argue even better news. Clayton Kershaw back at Dodger. Freddie Freeman smoke is building. How we feeling over there?
Yeah, there's definitely a reason for optimism, I think. Obviously, riding kind of the euphoria from yesterday, like you just said, of finally getting baseball back. Then today, like we kind of both agreed, Clayton Kershaw was somebody who I think we expected to sign pretty quickly. Sure enough, he's coming back. He posted on Instagram with the caption "We back" and him holding his World Series ring. And Dave Roberts had a press conference today. I know we're going to get into some of that stuff later. And so it's finally some normalcy that we've been waiting for throughout the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And the news, I mean, we all expected the lockout to end and the news to just immediately start flowing in. That didn't happen, but it has started today. So here's the plan. We're going to talk Clayton Kershaw first. That's the headline. This was my number one priority entering the offseason, finally accomplished about a month before the season. We are going to get to Dave Roberts' comments today. He made some interesting comments both about himself, his contract situation. There's some Trevor Bauer stuff we need to get to. And then we're going to do Freddie Freeman kind of towards the end of the show, sort of crossing our fingers that there's a chance we get some Freddie Freeman news tonight. Now, we'll get to all of that stuff. I would say there's optimism. I know people in the chat saying, I think he's going back to Atlanta. I think it's all smoke. We'll see. Dodgers are making a push. There seems to be a gap between the Dodgers' latest offer and the Braves' latest offer. We'll get to that, but let's start with Clayton Kershaw. There were rumors he might retire. There were rumors that he might join the Rangers. The Dodgers, of course, hovering in the background of all of this. You and I talked last night, Matt. Both of us thought he was coming back to the Dodgers. It seemed pretty clear retirement was off the table. We just thought, as a guy who likes to win, who values winning as much as him, it didn't make sense for him to leave. He's back, but on the surprising piece here is a 1-year, $17 million deal. That's a $14 million pay cut from last year. I don't know if that's what his market was. I don't know if this was an effort by him to allow the Dodgers to go out and get a guy like Freddie Freeman, save a little bit of money there. But were you surprised at how all this played out with Clayton Kershaw?
A little bit. And, heading into the offseason, my expectation was it was probably going to take an average annual salary of 18 to 20 million and probably for 2 years to either re-sign him if you're the Dodgers or to sign him if you're the Texas Rangers. Maybe the Rangers would have to have paid a little bit more of a premium because, like we have touched on repeatedly, they're not a contender, and winning is something that Clayton Kershaw has been very open about how important it is to him.
Yeah.
And obviously that wasn't going to happen in Texas. They have Corey Seager. They've made some decent improvements so far in the offseason before the lockout began, but they're still kind of a ways from really competing. So to get him at $17 million, obviously with incentives, considering some of the health questions last year, makes sense. But the 1 year, I do agree with you. It surprises me. And I guess, as much as there's excitement with him still being back with the Dodgers, the 1 year sort of suggests, like, is this going to be it?
Yeah. Yeah, to me, I mean, the 1 year, I'll be honest, for me, it just makes sense. It's like a guy at Kershaw's age. He doesn't need the money. He's not looking for long-term security. He's the type of guy who just, I'll play on a 1 year contract. We'll reevaluate at the end of the year. Could it be, this is my one last hurrah? Sure, it's totally possible. But could it also be, I don't know how my arm's going to feel. I don't know how I'm going to feel physically. I don't know what I want to do a year from now. I'm just going to leave all my options on the table. Again, if Clayton Kershaw wants to pitch next year, like that's going to be an option for him pretty much no matter how this upcoming season goes. And so it's not like he has to worry, well, I better lock in the second and third year now. The $17 million was surprising, but again, keep in mind, this is a guy who missed the end of last season with injury. It's a forearm injury. He did not need surgery. But there's still some question marks about how healthy he is. I think we sort of overrate how old he is. I mean, Clayton Kershaw is not even 34 years old. We compare that to a guy like Max Scherzer, who's pushing 40, signed a contract that will push him past 40. So we have to keep that in mind. But what did we do with Clayton Kershaw, the player? Obviously, we know Clayton Kershaw, the sort of, I won't say personality because it's not like an overbearing personality, but we know the legend of Clayton Kershaw and how amazing he has been. Matt, where's your estimation of what Clayton Kershaw is in 2022 for this Dodgers team?
I think he's a very good number 3 starter in the rotation. And I will add the caveat, like I said last night, if he re-signed, I think he's who the Dodgers will give the ball to on opening day, which, again, for some of the viewers, if you haven't seen, it is Friday, April 8th against the Colorado Rockies. We have more information up on our website if you want to read all about kind of the changes and how the schedule's going to pick up, and double headers and all that are going to all 162 in. But yeah, aside from that, he's your number 3 starter, and I think he understands that and will accept that. And I think he's a very good number 3.
Yeah, from my perspective, the way I see people talking about Clayton Kershaw, I wonder how many of them remember what he looked like when he actually pitched. I know there were injuries. I know there were issues on that front. But when you look at his numbers, they're really, really good. I mean, last year, if you just look at his basic numbers, 2021, throws 121 innings, so that's the piece you don't love. 3.55 ERA. The fielding independent pitching, which is kind of a predictive stat, was 3.00, very good there. xFIP was 2.87. He had the highest strikeout per 9, dating all the way back to 2015. It was the 3rd highest mark in his entire career. The walks per 9 was pretty much right in line with sort of his career average. It was a little bit below his career average, excuse me. So I look at that, and I'm like, I like the Kershaw I see. You go to his StatCast, people that follow know I like that. I mean, red is good, blue is bad. Everything on here except for fastball velocity is red. That means you're in the top basically 40% of the league. Some of the highlights: expected on base average, 85th percentile; expected ERA, 85th percentile; strikeout percentage, 85th percentile; walk percentage, 97th percentile; whiff percentage, 94th percentile; chase rate, 90th percentile. His exit velocities, his hard hits, barrel percentage are all in the top 40%. And so when you say he's a very good number 3 starter, I think we've gotten used to him being a number 3 starter because he has been behind Walker Buehler and Julio Urias and some of these guys. But I think we need to remind ourselves that to most teams, Clayton Kershaw is still the best pitcher on their roster. I think, how we define number 1 starter, is that just a top 30 starter in all of Major League Baseball? Because if that's the case, I think Clayton Kershaw, you could make a case, is actually a number 1 starter. Now, he's the 3rd best for the Dodgers, but I think league-wide, he's a high-end number 2, if not low-end number 1 in my estimation.
Yeah, those are definitely great points. And I'll even add to it, he was meeting the eye test when he came back last year. His first, I forgot what it was, 2 or 3 starts, he was pitching well, and you could see the progression. Like, okay, he's building up. He's going to be ready for the postseason. And if I'm remembering correctly, his second to last start, there were some struggles. And then obviously his last one was cut short because of the injury. Now looking back on it, I'm inclined to believe that the second to last start, the forearm might have been giving him a little bit more trouble. And it wasn't disclosed. And then obviously we saw what happened with the injury. So yeah, with health and some rest, I think, like you said, he could arguably be, at worst, a number 2 starter caliber in baseball.
And responding to the comments real quick, to be clear, when I say he's a number 1, if you were paying attention, I did not say that Clayton Kershaw is the best pitcher on the Dodgers roster. What I said is he's the number 3 starter for the Dodgers, but oftentimes I think as Dodger fans, we get spoiled by thinking, oh, wow, we have like the best number 3 starter, which might be true, but remember that if you go around the league, Clayton Kershaw, if he's one of the top 30 starting pitchers in baseball, I think he is. Now, I think Buehler and Urias probably top 10, top 15. Then he could be, there's an argument that could be made that he's a number 1 starter. League-wide, not the number 1 starter on the Dodgers. So again, for the folks in the comments that are having trouble with that one, let me be clear there. I'm not saying he's better than Walker Buehler, as some people apparently think that I said. Lots of comments on Freddie Freeman. If you missed the intro, we're going to get to Freddie Freeman. We're going to talk through a couple things first. Kershaw, Dave Roberts' comments, in hopes that maybe we get a Freddie Freeman update that we can process in real time. With Kershaw in the fold, Matt, the natural question now is, what do the Dodgers do from here? As a starting pitching market, Carlos Rodon is another guy that we've talked about. He signs with the Giants. I would argue I would take Kershaw over Rodon. That's just me. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made. Rodon's ceiling might be higher at this point in his career, although there's a lot more fluctuations there. So beyond those two, I mean, we're in the Zach Greinke territory, and in case you haven't checked Fangraphs in a while, Zach Greinke territory is not the territory that you want to be swimming in if you're the Dodgers. So the Dodgers have Buehler, they have Urias, they have Kershaw. That's a clear 1, 2, and 3 in some order. Number 4, you've got Andrew Heaney penciled in. I imagine it's a guy they paid about $8 million to, a guy that everybody looks at the sort of peripherals and they say, wow, there's something here. Nobody's been able to untap it. The Dodgers hopes they can. Then you get into the 5th spot. You've got Tony Gonsolin penciled in on most depth charts right now. Andre Jackson, Mitch White, Ryan Pepio, among others that are sort of floating around. So with Rodon off of the table, what do you do from a starting pitching perspective? Do you go out and you sign another guy? Are you starting to look at the trade market, seeing if Luis Castillo and that type of pitcher is available? Where do you go from here, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do your due diligence and kind of check in, who might be available on the trade market. I'm not overly familiar with the full extent of the available starting pitchers in free agency. I remember thinking at first glance that there really wasn't anybody who I thought would be worth pursuing. That being said, if there's a veteran hanging around that the Dodgers could potentially sign to a minor league contract type thing, or even just, 1-year deal, team friendly, sure, stockpile some depth. But short of that, I think you just rely on the depth you have in your organization. And that was a point that you brought up in our live show last night was, the team as constructed, and then now definitely with Clayton Kershaw in the mix, is good enough to start the season and probably still be in first place in the NL West come the trade deadline, which then at that point you can kind of evaluate, okay, who is where, and then adjust.
Yeah, here's some names that are still available in case these interest you. Danny Duffy, a guy that honestly we thought might come back, but he is a free agent. Willie Peralta, Yusei Kikuchi, Tyler Anderson, Michael Pineda, Zach Greinke, Chris Ellis. I'm going to be honest, I've never heard of Chris Ellis before, so shout out to Chris Ellis for making this list that I'm reading. So, I mean, it's rough out there, is the point that I'm getting at. And yeah, you sort of brought up something that I mentioned last night, which I stand by, which is if I'm the Dodgers and I look at the sort of the scope of the league, I say, first of all, 12 teams make the playoffs, 6 in the National League. Right now, as constructed, am I one of the 6 best teams in the National League? Absolutely, unequivocally, there's no doubt in my mind I am. The Dodgers are the favorites. Right now, as constructed, they are the favorites. Now, is signing someone like Freddie Freeman baked into that? I'm sure it is. But they're the favorites as is. I'm looking around and saying, my lineup, with or without Freddie Freeman, probably the best in the National League. My bullpen, historically very good. No reason to believe it won't be very good. Joe Kelly, if he comes back, it makes it even better. Pitching, I've got probably the best 1-2 in all of baseball there in Buehler and Urias. We just talked about, I now feel like I have one of the best number 3s, if not the best number 3 pitcher in all of baseball. So for me, I look at Haney, Gonsolin, Pepio, White, Jackson, and I say, can I find, out of those 5, can I get 2 guys that I trust? Can I get 2? Now, we're going to talk Trevor Bauer in a moment. There's a reason we're not including him in here, and that's just because I think no matter how optimistic or pessimistic you might want to be about Trevor Bauer, I don't think you can count on anything at this point. So let's just set him aside and say, under the impression that maybe they just cut him or trade him or whatever, he's not a part of it. David Price, another name I haven't mentioned. That's because I actually think David Price might get cut. I think he's washed. I think they're going to pay him his money and tell him, sorry, we need the 40-man roster spot. So, but for me, I would look at that group and I would say between Haney, Gonsolin, Jackson, White, Pepio, Landon Knack, Bobby Miller, etc., can I find 2 guys that I trust? And maybe it's 4 guys to fill 2 spots at various points throughout the season. I think the answer to that question is yes. I think you just roll the dice. And look, if you get to August, July, and this is a disaster, these guys are trash, and none of them are ready, then fine. Then that's when you go and you evaluate the trade market. But I just find it really impossible to believe that out of those 5 or 6 names I just mentioned, we can't find 2. Now, Haney is going to get a long runway. Like he's option number 1. I think Gonsolin is option number 2, and then we go from there. Your thoughts on Gonsolin? I know we've had this conversation before. I'm very pro Gonsolin. I look at his ERA, sub 3 for his career, and I like it. Now, some people responded to me on Twitter when I posted his career ERA and pointed out a couple things. One, as a starter, it's actually lower. It's 2.5. But the second piece is the underlying metrics on Gonsolin, the predictive stuff of based on runners on base, that kind of thing. He's actually probably gotten very fortunate. His ERA maybe should be in the 4s. So I think injury played into it. I think you're sort of guessing. Do you want to bet on injury made him look worse than he actually is, or luck has made him look better than he actually is? I tend to lean, I think he's better than his or I think he's better than he has performed. And so, are you in on Gonsolin, or who would you sort of give the nod to in that number 5 spot?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I would go with Gonsolin, and some of his struggles aside from injuries, I think, especially in the postseason, his role has changed so much. He hasn't really been able to settle into something. So I think now, if he's healthy, he uses spring training to really build up as a starter. He knows he's going to be a starter. I think that would go a long way in maybe getting a little bit more out of him than what we've seen. And at that point, Andrew Haney, he's probably so. Then if Gonsolin's your number 4 starter potentially, then I think Haney could be your 5 because I view him as more of a swing guy at the end of the day. David Price, I think, will be in the bullpen if not maybe somewhere else. And yeah, at that point, you go a couple months and you see what you have and figure it out when the time comes.
Absolutely. Looking through the comments here, someone said Backyard Toy Adventures, David Price could go play in Arizona. That's probably true. There are probably plenty of rosters that would take him there. Let's see. Somebody compared Gonsolin to Ross Stripling, which I thought was an interesting comp. And again, I mean, that's a positive. It was Kyle said, Gonsolin seems like a Stripling guy to me. I mean, Stripling was really, really good. He made an all-star team one year, I think, with the Dodgers. He's turned into a very competent major league player. So if the Dodgers can get that sort of production out of Tony Gonsolin, I think they would be more than thrilled there. Let's see. Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, and people saying, again, not great depth. You might be right. My point is just that there's no need to rush into making a decision now when they've expanded the leeway you have to making the playoffs. Yes, the Giants will be good. Yes, the Padres should be competitive. But even if you finish third in the division, there's probably a really good chance that you're going to end up making the playoffs. So let's shift gears from Clayton Kershaw. Oh, go ahead.
I just think, too, another thing, like, if you want to question the depth, that's certainly fair. But then the other side of that coin is what options are out there. Like you just went over, the free agents. They're not great. From a trade standpoint, perhaps there's something that the Dodgers can work on and complete that maybe nobody sort of saw coming. But again, like a trade takes 2 teams or 3 teams to complete. And so then that's the other thing with trades is like, the Dodgers should trade so-and-so. He's not doing anything. Well, okay, if that's your view of that player, what do you think he's going to get you in return? Like you have to typically trade something to get something. And so they're fine. Like they may just have to kind of
it will be interesting to see if the Freddie Freeman move does come through. Does that make a guy like Gavin Lux maybe expendable in trades where now you can turn around and trade a Gavin Lux and go get a pitcher from the A's or a pitcher from the Reds and sort of augment the roster that way because, there's just not going to be a natural starting position for him. So interesting to see how that plays out. Let's shift to Dave Roberts here. And again, we're going to get to Freddie Freeman in just a bit, so hang tight on that. But Dave Roberts had a press conference today, kind of gets thrown out to the wolves in the midst of this. You sort of were watching along with this and taking notes. What stood out to you most about what Dave Roberts said throughout? Because he covered a range of topics, his own contract, Trevor Bauer, the team as a whole, Freddie Freeman. What stood out to you the most with Roberts?
I think what stood out most was that he openly said, yes, obviously, who we would love Freddie Freeman here, who wouldn't type thing, just because in the past he's typically tried to shy away from things like that. And, there obviously isn't going to be like any tampering issue because Freddie Freeman is a free agent, but it was still a little bit unlike Dave Roberts to sort of come out of his shell, I guess, if you will. So that struck me as kind of interesting. The second thing is, the Trevor Bauer situation is obviously still hanging over the organization. And Dave Roberts said that he wasn't too privy, was how he worded it, with, the latest on that situation and MLB still conducting their investigation and all that. And he added, I'm not going to close the door on Trevor Bauer potentially being in camp with us, which obviously is opening this weekend. Of course, a couple hours later, and we're going to get into this, Trevor Bauer was then placed on administrative leave once again. And then, with his contract, it was kind of status quo, not worried about it. The only real change that I would, sort of highlight from there is that he said it's really close. So I anticipate something getting done probably within the next 3-4 days before maybe spring training games start next week.
It's funny. You would think that your manager, a guy like Dave Roberts, not having a contract extension in place at this point in the year would be a major story. And yet with everything else going around the league, not to mention the fact that everybody kind of assumes that this is going to get done, that you would think that would be a bigger story. It has not. He continues to say, hey, this is going to get done. As you pointed out, the odds are it probably gets done before Friday's opening to spring training. And I don't even know if it'll make tidal waves when it does, because there's probably so much else that's going to be happening around it. Let's talk about the Bauer piece, though, because I think that's interesting. I was kind of shocked by Roberts' comments. Roberts was asked about Bauer, and he said, hey, I'm not closing the door. What was his language on the door is open for him to be a part of this team? What did he say?
I'd have to look up the quote to get it. I don't want to mess it up, but he said something to the effect like, I'm certainly not going to shut the door, or the door isn't completely closed. Something to that effect.
At the time, Bauer was eligible to come report to camp. Now, as you kind of hinted, as you said, later in the day, just a couple hours later, MLB extended his leave of absence for another week. So I believe it's through March 19th. He is not allowed to report to camp and not allowed to be with the team. But to me, that was just interesting because the Dodgers have had a long time to think about how they are going to play this. And I don't know if this was a tactic by the Dodgers to say, yeah, we're going to let him because maybe they're trying to trade him and they want teams to think, yeah, we're fine with him coming. No problem. I don't know if this is the approach, which is he's going to be welcomed back as long as he's not suspended, which, again, most people around the league seem to think even if a big suspension is handed down, he would already have served all of that time by missing half of last season. Or was this just not sort of an off-the-cuff comment where the Dodgers have a plan not to involve him, and yet Roberts is going rogue? That last one seems the least likely, and yet that was an opportunity for them to say, you know what, Trevor Bauer is not going to be a part of this franchise, and they didn't.
Yeah, I think they're honestly just waiting on MLB to basically conclude their investigation, which with whatever may come, whether it's a suspension, which we have discussed and definitely touched on last night. If it is, he's probably not going to get more than the amount of games that he missed last season, so it'll basically be a wash. So my sense all along has been the Dodgers really don't want to be kind of the first, make the first move with that. I think they want MLB to complete their investigation, make their decision, and then the Dodgers might come out and say, okay, Trevor Bauer potentially is not going to pitch for us anymore or whatever, or he is going to be back on the team or whatever they
and I would
deciding.
say, the good news for everybody involved is that the fact that his leave was extended for 7 days makes me think that maybe Major League Baseball is nearing a decision. There will at least be closure. Now, who knows? They could obviously wait a week and then extend it another week and extend it another week. This is in conjunction with the Players Association, by the way. So the Players Association is agreeing to all of these extensions, which is important to note. But we'll see. I mean, again, complete mystery to me. I still am under the belief, and we've talked about this, and we both agree. We still think the most likely scenario is that Trevor Bauer never pitches for the Dodgers again. Now, that used to be because I thought he was going to be suspended for a while. I don't think that anymore. I just think the Dodgers are going to look at the mess that he has created and attracted to himself and say, we want no part of this. We know we have to pay him. If we can trade him, great. If we can't, then so be it. We're just going to eat the money and move on. Again, we've discussed, regardless of how you feel about Trevor Bauer, the Dodgers roster, even without him, is plenty good to go and win the World Series and be the most competitive team out there. So that's an interesting note there to make. Anything else that Roberts touched on besides Bauer, besides the contract, besides the sort of out in the open comments on Freddie Freeman that jumped out at you?
Not too much. I mean, the rest of it was really just kind of general spring training stuff. Actually, well, I guess I should maybe walk back a little bit. He did say which Max Muncy had already kind of come out and said, anticipate being ready for opening day. Dave Roberts sort of echoed that sentiment. He pegged the strength in Muncy's injured elbow at about 85% right now. But there seems to be, confidence from all involved that Muncy will be ready. It wouldn't shock me if maybe he needs an extra week just because we're dealing with a shortened spring training. But it's at least not looking to be kind of a long-term absence.
Randy asks, what makes everyone believe that the Dodgers won't bring Bauer back? This narrative is being driven by the media. I'll answer this. And I mean, again, this is not... I'll just say why people think Bauer won't come back is because there is a large contingent of people. Now, we live in a society where we are typically surrounded by people that agree with us. So we have people comment on our videos and say, hey, I'm in this group of people and every single one of them wants Trevor Bauer back. And then you go on Twitter and it's every single person thinks Trevor Bauer is the worst human being to ever walk the face of the earth and they're going to stop being Dodger fans if he comes back. I think the point is, and this was brought to light, not to cross sports here, but Deshaun Watson decided not to be charged. And as many people tweeted out, the system that we have does not lead us to be able to say with confidence that because somebody was not charged, it means they are innocent. Those are two separate conversations. 99% of accusations, something like that, do not end up with charges. That doesn't mean 99% of people are lying. It just means the system is not set up in a way to help these things. So bringing this back to the Trevor Bauer situation, whether or not he was charged is a big deal. Had he been charged, that would have been a clear demarcation of something, whether he would have been convicted, again. But just because he was not charged, I don't think is a natural he must be innocent situation. Now, we could get into the minutia of is what he did sort of weird but legal, or is it abusive? That's where the gray area lives and where people have to make their own decisions. But my hope, at least for us as a people that can have a dialogue, is I hope we can all at least understand the other side's position. If you're the person that says Trevor Bauer should never pitch for the Dodgers again, I hate him, I won't be a fan if they pitch for him, I hope the other side can look and say, there's a chance that what he did was absolutely horrific and terrible, and if it's true, then I agree with you. And yet I would also say to the other side of, we don't know all the details. We have some pictures, we have some details. Maybe you think we have enough details, but to say that definitively 100% you know what happened seems to me to be a mistake. Me personally, I'm perfectly fine if he never pitches for the Dodgers again. I think all of the nonsense that came with him before he signed with the Dodgers does not give him the benefit of the doubt in a situation like this. That's my personal opinion. Now, if somebody wants to disagree with me and say I'm a psychopath, whatever, but that's just where I land. So I don't know where you stand on all this, Matt. I mean, I know what your personal opinion is, but I hope I'm making sense when I can understand both sides of the argument, and I just don't like when we say, if you disagree with me, you're stupid.
Yeah, certainly. I think you explained that very well. And, frankly, without belittling or brushing off the entire situation, at best, Trevor Bauer is a distraction.
Totally.
Right? Like, if you want to look at it at, the best case scenario, he's a distraction. And I agree with you. When they signed him, it wasn't something I thought they should have done. I worried about his kind of online presence and history and all that stuff that he brought with him. I understand athletes have interests off the field. I personally question, how much do you want to sort of do the blogging, the online stuff compared to baseball? And I'm not somebody who thinks, if a baseball player isn't throwing a baseball or in the batting cages 24/7, that something's wrong. But I have my personal questions there. And I also just wonder, like, is he that good? Is he worth it? I didn't think so at the time. Then this unfortunate situation came about, and so my feelings have only become personally stronger in that sense. Now, in terms of a media narrative, I think that's a narrative, if you will. It's not necessarily being pushed by them. Information has been sourced by people, at least around the team. And I would also just say you haven't really seen players come out and say, I hope he comes back. So I think it's fair to suspect whether or not he would be overwhelmingly welcomed back by the players. And if he's not, then
because the Dodgers have valued clubhouse chemistry, which, again, I think is an important piece of this, right? We got people in the chat saying what happened to innocent until proven guilty, right? In the legal system, that's how it works. Keep in mind, Major League Baseball is doing their own investigation. Now, I'm guessing if you're a pro-Bauer person, then you're not going to like it if the MLB investigation finds him guilty, right? Because they might, right? If they decide to suspend him, it means somebody has looked at the evidence and decided to find him guilty. And so, again, people are going to disagree with me. That's perfectly fine. I hope for us as a community, like I hope for us as a world, that we would be able to disagree. Now, this is a emotionally charged topic. I understand that. It's very personal for some people. But I think this is one of those things where we can all admit, I hope, that there's gray area. And when there is gray area, none of us should act like we have 100% confidence in what should or shouldn't happen. As people are pointing out in the comments, it's also worth noting the Dodgers have to pay him $34 million this year. So yes, I understand that whether finances come into the decision and whether the Dodgers say we don't like him as a person, we don't like what's going on, but hey, we've got to pay him $34 million. We might as well go get a little bit of our money's worth out of it. I would understand that type of thinking because he's going to go play for somebody else if you trade him, right? If he's not suspended, he's eligible to play. So why would you want to pay him $34 million to go play for the Houston Astros or whatever organization decides that they want him? So enough Trevor Bauer talk. I think it just gets people riled up, but I do think it's worth noting Dave Roberts, again, the door is not closed on him coming back, which was immediately followed by a 7-day extension of his leave, so he's not allowed to report to camp. So there you have it. So we've got Clayton Kershaw. We've got comments from Dave Roberts. Why don't you talk a little bit about the spring training schedule, and then we can get into the topic of conversation that everybody else is most excited about, which is Freddie Freeman. But spring training, a couple tweaks to the schedule for folks that might be down there or looking at their calendars. So let us know.
Yeah, so camp is opening Sunday. Players are going to be arriving, I imagine, probably starting. You might have had some arrivals today, maybe some even Saturday, but Sunday is the official report date. The Dodgers have said then their first workout is Monday. And what changed with their spring training schedule is that's going to begin Friday the 18th, which looked like kind of the start date when factoring in the cancellations MLB already had because the lockout was still going on. However, the Dodgers were, instead of playing the Diamondbacks at Salt River Fields, they're now going to be hosting the Milwaukee Brewers at Camelback Ranch. Other games and opponents were all sort of mixed around. And so we have all that information for you guys up on DodgerBlue.com. There's an article there explaining what the schedule is, and it's all listed out. Start times aren't out yet, unfortunately. After they wrap up Cactus League play, they come back to Southern California for the annual Exhibition Freeway Series from April 3rd to the 5th.
And hey, if you had already penciled your schedule in around playing the Diamondbacks and not the Brewers, then shout out to you. But yeah. I'm excited. I mean, every time, the same thing happened over the last couple of years. When I'm away from baseball for long enough, I will consume spring training. And this is going to be perfect. It's not going to be too long. The first couple weeks, it's going to be lots of James Outman, lots of Ryan Pepio action, guys that I want to see play, see them in the field. And then as the weeks go on, we'll start to see a lot of the regulars kind of filtered in there. So let's do what everybody wants us to do, Matt. Let's talk about Freddie Freeman. Unfortunately, we do not have an update. We do not have news. But there's been a number of reports that have leaked out over the course of the last few hours. The headline would be this: the Dodgers are making a concerted, significant effort to sign Freddie Freeman. By my account of Twitter, there is nobody else that is being mentioned besides the Dodgers right now and presumably the Braves. The Yankees, some other teams that had been mentioned. It is all about the Dodgers. Now, reading between the leaves on some people that I trust, people that I know are well connected, my sense of the situation is that the Dodgers have made an offer to Freddie Freeman, and Freddie Freeman has gone back to the Braves one final time as if to say, this is what's on the table. Are you interested in matching it or coming close? Now, what's fascinating to me, again, reading between the lines, I don't have personal sources on this, it sure seems like there is quite a gap between the Dodgers deal and the Braves deal. The people that are saying this do not seem overly optimistic that the Braves are going to get close enough. Now, does Freddie Freeman decide to take one less year if that's the thing and just stay in Atlanta because it means that much to him? Or does he want the extra year and the extra money that the Dodgers seem to be offering him? That's the question. I believe John Morosi's last tweet was, we could have a decision tonight, but definitely within the next 24 hours. Now, people have been saying Freddie Freeman was going to be the first guy to sign for a day and a half. So take it all with a grain of salt. But I do think if you're a Dodger fan, the smoke has been building. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. There's time left. And until he signs and Jeff Passan, reports it as official, then I won't believe it. But I am as confident as I have ever been that Freddie Freeman could possibly be a Dodger. Where are you at, Matt?
Yeah, I'm with you, and I know that there was some concern when Morosi was sharing the information that the Dodgers had presented him with a contract offer and were aggressively pursuing him. There were concerns that is that a leak trying to get the Braves to increase their offer, and I don't think we're in that situation. I think the Braves are going to sort of stick to where they're at. It's not a maybe Max Scherzer before the lockout where, the Dodgers went up to this X amount and now they're taking that back to the Mets to see if Steve Cohen would exceed it and trying to get that sort of bidding. I think the Braves just won't do a bidding war. So I don't believe that this is that. I agree with you. I think there is significant interest from the Dodgers side. I think Freddie Freeman, Chipper Jones had come out also, keep in mind, saying that, hey, there is some frustration between Freddie Freeman and the Braves front office. I don't think Chipper Jones is going to be somebody who makes something up or who has any sort of ulterior motives trying to push Freddie Freeman out of LA. He just, out of Atlanta. He just sort of matter-of-factly said that, he could end up, because of the situation, he could end up looking at other teams. And so I think that's where we're at. And, the Dodgers obviously are a contender. The Dodgers are a team and a franchise that other players, when they have joined, have talked about, yes, I watched them from the other side and I admired and respected them, and I think Freddie Freeman falls into that.
Yeah, no, I think it's all a great point, and I think I'm with you. If the Braves were going to step it up and match the numbers that we're talking about, wouldn't this already be done? Wouldn't they have done this before the lockout? Wouldn't they have done this in the last 24 hours? Again, the people I'm tracking with seem to suggest that this is not the difference between 6 years and 180 and 6 years and 170. This feels like the difference between 6 years and 180 and 5 years and 140. Kind of a deal. So there's quite a massive gap between the two. If the Braves were going to do it, it seems to me like they already would. But I respect Freddie Freeman. He's been there his whole career. He wants to give them one final chance, it appears, to make that jump and see if they can close the gap. Now, the question we get in here is, 6 years and $180 million for Freddie Freeman. Is it worth it, Matt? Do you think it's worth it? Now, we went over some of these numbers last night, but the thing that I keep coming back to is this. We just added the universal DH. So we're talking about a guy who's a professional hitter, an elite hitter. The career is going to be extended. So if you're worried about Freddie Freeman played last year as a 31-year-old, so if we're talking a 6-year deal, we're talking 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, and his 37-year-old seasons, okay? Freddie Freeman at 37 in a league where there's a universal DH is a dramatically different situation. That's number one. Number two is he plays first base. He plays the position that requires the least athleticism, the position that takes away, like, has the lowest wear and tear on your body, unless you're Max Muncy and blow out your elbow doing it, right? So that's another thing. And third, this is a guy who has been historically healthy. I've mentioned this last night. He has missed 7 games in the last 4 years. He's missed 7 games. Now, if it's only 7, that tells me those were rest days. Those weren't 15-day IL trips or 10-day IL trips, right? And so he's had great health the last 4 years. The numbers are as good. I mean, he had 300 with an OPS of 900 this past year, 31 home runs. We know he's successful in the playoffs. He's a great clubhouse guy. He bats left-handed. He plays one of the few positions where the Dodgers have some flexibility. To me, and I've said this all along, and it's crazy to some people, I feel much more comfortable with 6 for 180 with Freddie Freeman than I do with the contract that Corey Seager got. If you gave me those 2 players and those 2 contracts, I would take Freddie Freeman and feel good about it, rather than the Corey Seager one I would feel very, very nervous about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, another thing with Freddie Freeman too is, and I touched on this last night in our other live show, yes, maybe year 5 and year 6 of the contract, you see some decline. But again, this is like you just outlined, it's declined from an elite level, which then he probably is still pretty good, which you would take in your lineup. And there's also, as much as we touched on Max Muncy and the confidence that he's going to be ready for opening day or just be healthy, period, I still think you can't necessarily take that for granted, because there still is a torn UCL in that elbow. And what if something happens? Corey Seager had to undergo Tommy John surgery. So if you possibly lose Muncy, whether it's to Tommy John or just for an extended period of time because his elbow needs more time to recover, then what? If you don't have Freddie Freeman, like you're facing a pretty significant void in your lineup. If you have Freddie Freeman, you already are needing to replace a left-handed bat in Corey Seager. You hope that Cody Bellinger, sort of rebounds and shows more of the player that he was in the postseason than during the regular season last year. But that's another somewhat question mark. So I would argue, like, you sort of need Freddie Freeman. And if, we got into this last night, if it's not Freddie Freeman, then okay. Like, I then look at maybe a Chris Bryant.
I
maybe
believe,
they
signed with
go
the Mariners.
kick the
I
tires.
believe I saw that come across. I could be wrong. I saw a report a couple hours ago that I thought Chris Bryant signed. I'll check on that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem. Well, if he's still available, then him, Seiya Suzuki, the Dodgers were connected to him again. And, maybe they, like I said, they kick the tires on Anthony Rizzo, who would be left-handed, plays first base. But I think Freddie Freeman has to be your first choice. And I think 6 years at 180, frankly, even if it's 190.
Yeah. Okay. The Chris Bryant stuff, it was not an agreed upon deal. So I should correct that. I think it was Morosi who said that chatter has continued. So Pacific Northwest guy up here. So apologies on that one. It is funny to say the Dodgers need Freddie Freeman. Again, like the Dodgers lineup without Freddie Freeman, probably the best in all of baseball. And I get what you're saying with Muncy and sort of needing to fill that hole. But let's also keep in mind that Will Smith, Justin Turner, Chris Taylor, Trey Turner, Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, AJ Pollock. To say the Dodgers need anything is a little bit misleading. But I understand the point that you're making. 2 other things I'd say. The first is keep in mind that in all of these contracts, you would presumably be getting far more than $30 million worth of value in year 1 from Freddie Freeman versus year 6. You're really looking for, can we get $10 million worth of value? The second thing to keep in mind is just that the CBT thresholds, the competitive balance threshold, is going up every year. So we know that it's going to be increase, I believe, is it $12 or $15 million over the next 5 years. We don't know what the 6-year is because that'll be a new CBA negotiation in which they discuss the CBT. But that's the other piece of this. Is $30 million for 6 years. I mean, that sounds like a long-term contract, but keep in mind this is a sport that's handing out 10-year contracts. And so there we go. So, again, with the DH, with all that kind of stuff, just some StatCast numbers for you, Freddie Freeman, if you're worried about the 31-year-old and what that looks like. 100th percentile in expected batting average last year. That's, again, best in the league. 98th percentile expected weighted on base. 96th percentile expected slugging percentage. 90th percentile max exit velocity. 86th percentile strikeout rate. 87th percentile walk rate. At 85th percentile average exit velocity. I mean, every single category on here is red. He plays a competent first base. Again, great player on and off the field. This is the type of guy that you line up for when he gets to free agency. He is a free agent. The Dodgers, again, seem to be at the front of the line, but we'll see there. So, we have no news yet, but let's go to questions. If folks in the comments have any questions, Matt, I'll give you one last word if you've got anything on Freddie Freeman that you want to share before we come to questions, or should we go straight to those?
No,
Okay.
let's go to the questions.
See. We'll scroll through here and see if we've got anything. Again, if you threw one in up above previously in the chat, feel free to go ahead and throw that back in there. Repetition is all right for us because that'll give us time to catch up to it and read it. Luis Sanchez says, you guys are jumping to conclusions with the age at the end of his contract. Look at Nelson Cruz. He's in his 40s and still hitting 40-plus home runs. Yes. How many other guys? How many other Nelson Cruzes are there out there? There's a reason there's one. We had Albert Pujols last year, who was sort of the counter to that, roughly the same age, and you saw his athleticism and the decline. If you're paying $30 million for Albert Pujols style stuff. Now, again, Freeman, we're talking about 37 the end of his year. That's very different than 40, 41, 42. So keep that in mind. Thunderpants asks, is Mookie Betts fully healthy?
Everything we've heard from Mookie has been. He was at an event with the Los Angeles Dodgers Foundation in November, and he reiterated his hip was healthy. He wasn't going to need surgery. So, yeah, there have been no indications
Seems like
otherwise.
good news considering he's one of the best players in all of baseball and a guy that we rarely seem to talk about because there's always other things going on, and you just forget that Trey Turner and Mookie Betts are on the roster, and they're two of the best players in the league. Let's see. JDS Third says, when is Dustin May expected back? This is a question we get a lot. Post All-Star break, and I thought your thoughts on starter versus reliever were pretty good, so why don't you share those again?
Yeah, so the timeline for him, at least for now, is he will be back at some point after the All-Star break. It's my belief that depending on how late in the season that becomes, it's probably likely that he returns as a relief pitcher just because I don't know if they'll have time to really stretch him out to a full starter's workload the way they may want to. Now, I'll add kind of the caveat to that. If they are facing a significant need for starting pitching, then I think they'll adjust their plans accordingly. But for now, my belief is, Dustin May comes back as maybe a multi-inning relief pitcher and a real weapon in that role.
Absolutely.
For the
absolutely. And again, we've seen guys thrive. He obviously has the stuff to come out of the bullpen, to be throwing upper 90s with nasty movement. That stuff plays up out there versus some of the other prospect type starting pitchers. Their stuff maybe wouldn't, mid 90s stuff, 4 pitches doesn't play up as well as 101 two-seamer and slider going around 15 inches in opposite directions. Oscar Camarena asks, chances we sign Kenley Jansen. You and I have both sort of said we think it's less likely than the Joe Kelly signing. Are you still in that same boat, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. Andrew Friedman was pretty open about the Dodgers still being involved in the market for Joe Kelly, even though the team declined their option on him for this season. Joe Kelly then recently was on AM 570 with David Vassay, and he said, yes, I want to come back with the Dodgers. We need to make it happen. So that mutual interest, I think, will lead to him re-signing at some point. Like I touched on last night, I think that's a deal that would come kind of later after the Kershaw and Freddie Freeman dominoes fell, just because there is the mutual interest, and I expect it to be relatively easy to hammer out a deal. And with Kenley, I'll just reiterate, if he's open to a real team-friendly contract, then maybe it's in the cards, but I don't know if he will be. And so, therefore, I just
I'm with
don't
you.
see
We've
him
discussed.
coming back.
I don't think there's a clear role for him. I think the Dodgers are going to use this as an opportunity to make their bullpen a little bit more flexible rather than have a set ninth inning guy. And I think just with the money we're talking about, you signed Freddie Freeman. The Kershaw number coming in low is really good. That helps with some of the collective bargaining stuff, the thresholds. So keep that in mind. Laura asks, did the Dodgers talk to Trevor Story? Was that ever rumored? I don't remember seeing anything concrete connecting them to Trevor Story. I will say this. There was a rumor that Jonathan Villar, who is not at the level of Trevor Story, but is kind of a utility middle infield guy. The Dodgers were connected to him today. I mentioned a guy like Tommy Pham as a bench bat. I think Villar kind of fits into that category as well. I don't think it's a Freddie Freeman or Jonathan Villar type of situation, but any other guys that you've seen the Dodgers connected to? You mentioned Suzuki already.
Yeah, have not seen anything with Trevor Story. I don't know if he's somebody they would necessarily contact, because if they do bring him in, he'd have to probably play second base. I think internally they have committed to moving Trey Turner over to shortstop this year. And so I don't know if Story would want to play second base, and that's just my speculation. I could be wrong. I think you covered it, Villar. Dave Roberts did mention that starting pitching and the bench are areas that the Dodgers sort of need to address on their roster, and I think that's something that Villar could help do. I don't really know. I think that's it in terms of interest that they've been guys that
and Villar coming off
so far.
A really good season. He was pretty bad in 2020. Played with the Mets last year, hit 250, 18 home runs. So most people thought he'd actually do fairly well in the market. Shortstop, second base, third base, switch hitter. So we talked about the Dodgers needing some different options, different looks off the bench, and so Villar would definitely solve some of those problems. JJ asks, long-term plans for Justin Turner's replacement at third base. They had a guy they drafted a number of years ago, Cody Hosey. They were sort of hoping he has been, if there's one Dodgers prospect who has kind of just fallen off the face of the earth, it's him. There is some positive sort of I wouldn't say positive reports, but maybe optimism that maybe, he gets a fresh start this year, clear his head a little bit and get things going. But not to say that you draft a guy and say, hey, 5 years from now, this is going to be the answer. But the DH helps Justin Turner. Obviously, he can hit. Hitting is not the issue. It's fielding that has kind of declined. So is Chris Taylor the long-term answer at third base? Is Gavin Lux the long-term answer at third base? What do you think?
I don't think it's Gavin Lux. I think if anything, we'll see, Chris Taylor as sort of a bridge to maybe Miguel Vargas, who is kind of rising through the prospect ranks. I will say Cody Hosey was among, we didn't touch on it, among the non-roster invites to spring training. So, the team, obviously they haven't given up on him, and there's no reason to. He's still young, and there's plenty of time for him to get his career kind of on the trajectory that many hoped for when the Dodgers drafted him. But I think Miguel Vargas would probably be the safer bet for the future, and that, I think, is still 3 or 4 years
Vargas
down
in
the
some
line.
places is the top-rated Dodgers prospect. I think, even if you're the most optimistic person, I think you're looking at end of 2023, maybe beginning of 2024, but that's optimistic. Derek asked, Jeff, do you think the Dodgers are getting old? Even with Freeman, most of our best hitters are past 30. First of all, I'd say 30 is not quote unquote old. They're definitely, that's prime. We're used to guys, that may be a little bit younger than that, but I don't know. I'll pull up a Dodgers roster to look at some ages, but I'm thinking of, Will Smith is the younger guy. Like Cody Bellinger's not really close to touching 30. Let's see. Oh man, that's not going to give me ages, birth dates. I can't do math like that. Come on, folks. Let's see if ESPN does me a solid and gives me ages straight on there. Oh, here we go.
I don't think they're too old of a team. I understand the question and the sentiment, but like we said, Freddie Freeman should still be plenty productive at 35 and even 36. And we're still
Matt Beatty is only 28 years old, so I'm not sure what the concern is here. No, Will Smith, 26 years old. Chris Taylor's 31. Obviously, Justin Turner's 37. Trey Turner's 28. Cody Bellinger, 26. Mookie Betts, 29. Gavin Lux, 24. Those are some of your core guys. Urias, 25. People forget how young he is just as he's been around. Vesia is 25. Dustin May is 24. Obviously, a lot of the prospect types. Gratterall is 23. Gonsolin's 27. Ferguson, 25. Buehler, 27. Bickford. Bickford's 26, so we got nothing to worry about. Phil Bickford, baby. So, I understand you're looking at a guy like Justin Turner, but really besides Turner, A.J. Pollock, of the guys that are starting, those are the only two that I would say are outside of their prime. And again, Pollock had his best year last year, so maybe he's at the tail end of his prime. But the rest of those guys, I would say, are either smack in the middle of or entering into their prime. And Will Smith, Will Smith's prime is going to be 15 years long, so just get used to that one.
I think, honestly, the only thing we're approaching the end of, basically, is the core of the Dodgers roster that we knew for the past 3-4 years. Because yes, like we just said, Kenley Jansen probably isn't going to be re-signed. Clayton Kershaw is closer to the end of his career than the beginning. Same thing for Justin Turner. And so that kind of core group, the number of those guys are definitely being phased out. And so the team will look different. But as a whole, no, I don't think you need to be worried about their overall age. And that's
Yeah,
even
and keep in
if
mind,
they
Keith
were to
Ross
sign
says the
Freeman.
Dodgers have the best farm system in all of baseball, so they got reinforcements coming down the pike. We kind of touch on this, but Saucy Prefab says, do you think Freeman is using the Dodgers as leverage against the Braves? That was my initial thought. I know you said you didn't necessarily think that was the case. Again, the stuff that I'm seeing, but reading between the lines, not claiming to have any sources here, just to be clear, seems to suggest that the gap is so large that this isn't a situation that somebody's trying to gain leverage. You don't try and use leverage to close a $40 million gap, for example. Use leverage if it's closer or if you're trying to get to a certain number. That doesn't seem to be the case. You said you don't think this is leverage, right?
I don't think so at all, just because I don't think the Braves are a team that would even entertain a bidding war. They're coming off winning a World Series. I was surprised that they didn't re-sign him before the lockout began. And in one of our early offseason videos, I said, I think that not getting done will end up helping the Dodgers, because it could turn into, if you're Freddie Freeman, you just help them win a World Series. You've grown up in the organization. You've meant a lot to that community. But now here they are sort of nickel and diming you, reportedly not wanting to extend to a 6th year. And I thought that was going to end up hurting them. And everything seems to suggest the Braves are sort of sticking to that. There was a report early today that they were kicking the tires again on a Matt Olson
More
trade.
power
So
to you.
I sort of feel like they've already moved on. Yeah, I feel like they've already moved on without Freddie Freeman, officially making any sort of
asks
decision.
who will be designated for assignment with Kershaw's return. It's a great point. The Dodgers have a full 40-man roster before Kershaw signs, before any Freddie Freeman news.
Yeah.
I am always terrible with this. I think as soon as spring training starts is when you can add guys to the 60-day IL. Is that right? Because as soon as you transfer a guy to a 60-day IL, then you open up spots on the 40-man. Do you know the timing of that? I'll look this up while you talk.
I forget if it's the actual day of or if it's within 2 or 3 days of when spring training sort of starts. So that would offer them some flexibility. Another thing, too, is, there obviously is still the DFA option, which maybe they don't necessarily want to do. And you can never rule out a trade. Maybe they send out Luke Raley for a minor league player who then doesn't have to go on your 40 man.
I can never, these are the types of things where I can never figure out. I wish there was a website somewhere that was just like, here is the date on the 60-day IL. But they've got guys like Dustin May who are going to be out for an extended period of time. And so that is an opportunity. I'm trying to think of if there are other guys they could put on that list besides Dustin May. There's nobody that's coming to mind.
Tommy Kahnle, you don't necessarily know where he's at in his recovery. Technically, maybe Ferguson as well. He's still coming back from Tommy John.
It seems like, I think that was one thing Roberts did say. I believe that Kahnle and Ferguson, he said neither of them they're expecting ready by opening day. Now, do you want to wait 60 days on those two guys? That would be the question. All right, let's see if we got couple more questions here. Hayden Cotty asks, do you think they will give Trey Turner an extension? Look, if we were not in condensed psychopath free agency mode right now, Trey Turner signing an extension would be the number one priority for me. I think Trey Turner is one of the best players in all of baseball, and he's a Dodger right now. So yes, I would absolutely put a massive contract in front of him, try to get him to avoid free agency. The collective bargain or the competitive balance threshold continues to go up. You're the Dodgers, they're going to spend over and above it, which is great. So Trey Turner is the type of player that you hope to get into the building and you hope to sign. We just said he's 28 years old. I would absolutely throw him a 7-8 year extension if he would take it.
Well, you wanted to give Trey Turner and Corey Seager a contract last year.
No, totally. That was my deal. Seager said
no.
So because here's my thing. Now, right now, if Trey Turner leaves next year, the Dodgers are going to be left holding the bag when it comes to who's playing shortstop. Now, maybe it's Chris Taylor, but that doesn't feel like a sustainable solution there. The opportunity of signing one to an extension was that then if both of them said no, you could go get a Trevor Story. You could go get a whatever, not Carlos Correa. Under no circumstances could it be Carlos Correa. But that was my belief. So, yes, that was my plan. Corey Seager said no to the money, whatever they offered him. Clearly not 10 for $325. Does Trey Turner want the same deal? I mean, Trey Turner's numbers and health are far better than Corey Seager's. So, we'll see what happens. But, yes, Trey Turner to me would be priority number 1B right behind Freddie Freeman at this point.
Yeah, I think that's just something they're not necessarily going to worry about. Maybe they've had preliminary talks, but they really need to see what happens primarily with Freeman, and then go from there. Because the contract extension, he could sign it during the All-Star break.
Yeah,
Like it wouldn't
absolutely.
matter at this point.
Absolutely. Okay, scrolling through here. Albert Pujols. You want Pujols back, Matt?
We touched on it last night. I'm not fully opposed to it. I don't think he would be the first person I would call or sign, but if it ends up being him, then I think that could be productive for the bench. I mean, the bench struggled, some of it because of injuries, some of it because of inexperience last year, and he's somebody who I think would accept the role and be understanding of what comes with it and be able to prepare and be comfortable in it.
Absolutely. Jonathan asks, who is the closest to getting called up pitching wise? As far as prospects go, obviously Mitch White and Andre Jackson already on the 40-man roster, guys that are included. Michael Grove, another guy who's on the 40-man roster, although I don't think anybody's expecting him to contribute this year. That was more of he needed to be protected, so that doesn't mean he's ahead of Ryan Pepio, Landon Knack, Bobby Miller, etc. So what's interesting is you mentioned the Dodgers announced the list of non-roster invitees to spring training, and only one of their pitching prospects was on that list. It was not Bobby Miller. It was not Landon Knack. It was Ryan Pepio. To me, that tells me, and his name has been mentioned, but that tells me he is head and shoulders, maybe he's a bit strong, but clearly ahead of the rest of those guys when it comes to Major League development. Did you think the same thing?
Yeah, I frankly was surprised that they didn't include at least Bobby Miller. Maybe Landon Knack I could understand a little bit just because when you talk about pitching prospects, he kind of seems to be, and I'm not trying to disrespect him, but seems to be the throw-in a little bit, right? Like it's always Ryan Pepio and Bobby Miller, and then Landon Knack as well. But when they announced the group of players, I was definitely surprised that only Pepio made it, and so because of that, I'm inclined to believe that he is probably who they view as being the closest.
Absolutely.
To
and again, I mean, Andre Jackson, Mitch White, like there are people that are believers in those guys as former prospects with some sort of pedigree that maybe there's something. Again, Pepio not on the 40-man roster, so keep in mind that if he were to get called up, that would be another spot on the 40-man roster. Let's see if we can get to another couple. We're coming right up on the hour mark. It's funny as I'm scrolling through now, we have like 100 people in here, both all saying, hey, talk about Trey. So there you go. We talked about Trey before I realized that you all wanted me to talk about Trey. Kyle very repetitively saying, can we talk about Trey Turner? Kyle, I hope, yes, Trey Turner with 12 exclamation points. Kyle, I hope we have satisfied you there with your desire to talk about Trey Turner. Man, Kyle is like all caps all the time. So there we go. Hopefully we saw that. Kyle Oak says, with all due respect, screw Carlos Correa. That is the opinion of the folks on this show. I can assure you of that. Okay. Somebody asked, can't remember who, so apologies, but this will be a fun one to answer. How many games did the Dodgers win in 2022, Matt? Exact number, ready, go. 103.
103.
Okay? That would be, how many did they win last year?
106.
Yeah, I was going to guess 107.
I forget if
let's see. 106 and no, that was 2019. Let's see.
Then they won more than that. Then I think they
you're
got
right. 106. 106 and 56. Same record in 2021 and in 2019. So Matt is predicting a regression from the Dodgers. Let the record show they are going to be worse in 2022 than they were in 2021. I'm going to say 107. No, you know what? I'm going to agree with you, Matt. I'm going to say 104, though. I'm going to be slightly more optimistic than you. I think the pitching staff's worse. Regardless of what you think about Trevor Bauer as a person, if he comes back, that number goes north of 106, in my estimation. I don't know how you could argue that he is clearly an upgrade over the guys that they have at the back end of the rotation. Whether or not that happens, I'm skeptical, so I'll stick with 104 and think that they play it a little more cautiously with some expanded playoffs and that kind of thing. So that's what I've got. Matt says 103, I say 104, and I get the advantage of going second there. So there we go. Let's see. Oh, here we go. We got some submissions in here. This is great. Joel says 106, 108, 101 from JDS. Third, Nick says 101, Luis 106, Skip 104, Laura 109. There you go, Laura. That's what I'm talking about. Ice Queen 106, William Andrews 106, Thunderpants 106, Corey 106, Derek 103, Suzanne 108. King Yellowman, 100 plus, no doubt. Deborah, 105. Let's see. I think that's what we got there. There was a funny comment in here. Oh, yeah. That was one other thing, is that somebody asked about Alana Rizzo. Kirsten Watson did announce that she will be back with the Dodgers this year. So there you go. Non-player news. I don't know. Did you mention that already? Okay.
No, I don't know. I mean, I guess I just assumed. I didn't know that that was something fans were interested in. I don't see. I didn't see
totally.
Alana Rizzo coming back. She's, I think, happy with kind of the transition she made to be closer to her family, and she's enjoying MLB Network. And I had assumed all along that Kirsten Watson would be back with the Dodgers this year.
Let's see. Freddie Freeman. Last update. Last refresh of the Twitter. Do we get something? Nothing yet. Nothing yet. So stay tuned. Somebody asked, hey, if Freeman signs tonight, will we get a live show? The answer is entirely depends on what time that occurs at. So
I can promise you that we will have an article up the minute he signs.
There you go.
So at least
Matt
look
is a
out for
fast
that.
writer, is what he's telling you. Unbelievably fast writer. Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. We appreciate, again, we said this last night. We're so grateful for you all watching the show, staying with us. Of course, now we've got exciting stuff to talk about. So we got tons of good content coming. We've got some exciting updates and news about the show as well. So check out DodgerBlue.com. As always, subscribe, ring the notification bell here on YouTube. Tell your friends, spread the word. Let's grow the Dodger community that's watching with us here at Dodger Heads. That's Matt. My name's Jeff. We'll see you next time, hopefully, with some good Freddie Freeman news.